Welcome to the 7th and final core module of the ANDVSA Statewide Primary Prevention Orientation, Evaluation. Evaluation is not just for experts. Really, it's something that all of us do on a regular basis. During this module, we will discuss what evaluation is, how it fits into our primary prevention efforts, and how evaluation tells the story of how we prevent violence in our communities. To begin this module, we will stress the importance of evaluation and see how it can help us to improve prevention programming. Next, we will go over some evaluation terminology to distinguish two types of evaluation and two categories of data. After that, we will look at evaluation from start to finish as we outline how to plan for evaluation. But before we get into all that, let's revisit the PIES framework one more time. In the past 3 modules, we have touched on evaluation briefly and mentioned that evaluation is a consideration in every aspect of prevention, whether it's evaluating a community to determine needs and resources, evaluating a local prevention coalition, or determining the effectiveness of a primary prevention plan or strategy. But what exactly does that mean? Evaluation is the process of gathering information to provide useful feedback about something. Thinking about evaluation can be daunting for a lot of people because it can seem like a confusing, number-heavy task. But if you think about it, you've probably done evaluation every day of your life in some way. Like when we decide whether or not we want to go back to that restaurant we ate at a couple weeks ago, or thinking about how a first date is going while it's happening. Evaluation is a way to understand our work better and to share the stories of our impact. And ultimately, while evaluation has its own language and unique processes, it's something that we do naturally. In this module, we will break down evaluation into manageable pieces so that when it is time for you to begin planning for evaluation, you will have some ideas as to what to evaluate and how to evaluate it. So we know evaluation is crucial for prevention, but why exactly? Evaluation helps us do a few things. Evaluation helps us understand the impact of violence in our community. The needs assessment, which we went over in Module 5, is a good first step that our local prevention coalition can take toward understanding how violence has manifested in our community. This allows us to see where or among whom violence occurs, the risk and protective factors present, and our capacity to prevent violence. We can then utilize the positive elements we have in our community to our advantage when we develop prevention strategies. Evaluation helps us direct programs that will address the issue in our community, too. Once we have determined the scope of the issue and where we see the issue in our community, we can use that information to guide the prevention strategies that we will develop. For example, through a needs assessment, we may have determined that teen dating violence is of particular concern in our local high school. From that information, we may decide that teen dating violence prevention should be one of our priorities and develop strategies that are designed to reduce the incidence of teen dating violence in our schools, such as healthy relationship skill building or empowerment activities. Furthermore, with our priorities determined, we can decide to allocate the resources available to us to teen dating violence prevention in our schools. And finally, evaluation will help us determine whether or not what we did to address violence in our community produced changes in behavior, knowledge, and attitudes. Going back to our previous example, let's say that we implemented a healthy relationships curriculum such as the 4th R in our local high school and middle school to address the problem of teen dating violence. After the problem has been implemented, we should collect data from participants to see if we had an impact on their skill sets and attitudes. And also, we would want to know what elements of what we are doing are working for us so that we can be sure to incorporate them in our prevention efforts in the future. Once we have collected the data, we can use it to alter our strategies so that we can get better results the next time around. Now that we understand why evaluation is so important to primary prevention, let's go over some terminology to describe the types of evaluation and data that we would want to obtain from those involved in our prevention efforts. First, let's go over 2 different types of evaluation, process and outcome. The process evaluation helps us understand whether or not our prevention effort was implemented as we intended, getting to understand how it was implemented. Some information that we could gain from a process evaluation includes whether we were able to reach our intended population, if we are impacting the knowledge, attitudes, or skills that we intended to, or if our staff were well trained enough to implement our prevention strategy. We could think of process evaluation as baking a cake. For example, we might consider whether or not we put the right ingredients in, or set the oven to the right temperature, or whether we left the cake in the oven for the right amount of time. You've probably already done a process evaluation and not even known it. Think about when you bake a cake. As you bake a cake, you probably do some internal review process as you go. Process evaluation questions about a cake might ask how long it took to bake, what ingredients were used, or what utensil was used to apply the frosting to the cake. An outcome evaluation tells us about the outcome or the end result of whatever it is we are evaluating, such as our prevention plan or a strategy. Through an outcome evaluation, we can gain insight on whether or not we are able to have an impact on the knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors we intended to influence. Let's go back to our cake example, and let's say that we're teaching someone to bake a cake. Baking a cake, like prevention, requires a certain set of skills. If we're teaching someone to bake a cake, they're going to need to know a few things. Being able to read a recipe is a fundamental skill in baking, as is knowing how to use certain equipment such as an oven or a mixer. Being able to successfully bake a cake also relies on other handy tricks, such as being able to tell if a cake is baked all the way through. We would want to ask about these skills to determine whether or not someone knows how to bake a cake. Now, let's have a look at the two different kinds of data that we could gather from our efforts: quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative data is data which can be measured using numbers. An example of quantitative data might be frequency. Maybe we are interested in how many times in the past month youth have been bullied in school, to which we could get a numerical response. We can gather this type of information using surveys and analyze the data once we have collected it to measure change or impact. After analysis, we can represent quantitative data visually through graphs, charts, or in something a little more creative like an infographic. Qualitative data consists of words and descriptions. We could obtain this information from interviews, written documents, or from direct observation, which we could express verbally, either written or spoken. If we wanted to get a little more fancy, we could also obtain this data using more creative means, such as through artwork, digital stories, or photographs, and we could then express the data through a photo or word collage, a screening, or a display. Let's have a look at this painting and see how we can evaluate it both quantitatively and qualitatively. Measuring the painting quantitatively, we might look at the physical aspects of the painting, such as its dimensions or its weight. We could also measure its monetary worth. When evaluating the painting qualitatively, we can describe characteristics of the painting verbally. For example, we might comment on what kind of paint was used or how the artist applied paint to the canvas. We could also determine what the subject matter of the painting was through qualitative evaluation. And aside from the physical properties of the painting, we could also understand how others feel about the painting and whether they feel the painting is good or bad. Now that we've got our terminology down, let's figure out how to put that knowledge to use in an evaluation plan. There are a few questions that will guide our planning process. These questions include: what will we evaluate? Who will collect the data? How will we collect the data? Where can we store the data? And finally, how can we analyze and use the data we collect? Let's consider the question of what to evaluate first. As we determine what to evaluate, we should consider our goals. If our community has a prevention plan, then the goals within should be a good place to start. Thinking about it from a resources point of view, the goals that we have set will help us prioritize the key strategies that we want to evaluate if we lack the resources to evaluate all of them. Let's say, for example, that one of our goals was to increase parent engagement in promoting safe and healthy relationships. After we have implemented our efforts, we could examine what parents are doing to connect with youth and whether or not our strategies ultimately impact youth's knowledge, behavior, and attitudes. Once we have determined what to evaluate, we next need to consider how we will evaluate. Traditional methods of data collection include observation or counting to determine participation in conducting surveys, interviews, and focus groups. Many prevention efforts involve working with youth who may not respond well to more traditional methods of data collection. For them, we might want to consider an alternative approach to data collection, such as a card sorting activity, playing a game, or using creative expressions such as videos, photography, drama, or art to collect data. Or, if we are measuring engagement, we may want to consider monitoring any social media outlets that we are using to see if youth are engaging with our efforts. Next, who will be in charge of data collection? Perhaps within our organization or among our prevention coalition or partners, we might be able to recruit a volunteer to spearhead our data collection process. If we are not lucky enough to have someone with that skill set among us, we might want to consider hiring a contractor if we have the resources to do so. Contractors may be costly, but they will take a great deal of burden off of our coalition or organization and ensure high-quality data collection and analysis. Once collected, our data is precious, and losing track of it could be catastrophic and could compromise our prevention efforts. Before we begin the data collection process, we need to determine a safe and secure location for our data. For example, we could store it online, on a secure server, or in a hard copy in a filing cabinet. Then, we should leave 1 or 2 trustworthy people with access to the data to ensure that it is not compromised. And finally, we need to figure out how we plan to use our data. Evaluation isn't useful to us unless we can find a way to put it to work. There are a number of ways that we can use our data to benefit our prevention efforts. One way that evaluation will help us internally is that it supports continuous quality improvement, or CQI. CQI is the process of modifying prevention efforts as they happen so that we can continuously improve our program rather than waiting for a new cycle or iteration. CQI is the way that we can strengthen our prevention efforts in subsequent implementations. Through CQI, we can build activities into strategies and strategies into programs. Furthermore, we can use it to strengthen our evidence base to support the use of a strategy that we are employing, and also to maximize the use of resources needed to implement prevention efforts. Evaluation is useful for recruiting and retaining partners as well. When approaching potential partners the first time around, some may have been hesitant to get involved with our prevention efforts. We might be able to use our data to convince those people to join us. Similarly, if we can demonstrate our successes to our current partners, we increase our chances of being able to keep them involved and engaged. Evaluation can also help us acquire funding for prevention programs. Funders prefer to contribute to programs that they feel will produce results and generate change. We can strengthen our case for funding if we use our evaluation to demonstrate the successes of our program. This was just a brief overview of considerations. If you are interested in developing an evaluation plan, there are websites that offer free resources devoted to evaluation that can help your community evaluate primary prevention efforts effectively. Also, on the ANDVSA website, you can view examples from Alaskan communities and templates from evaluation consultants. Now, let's see what evaluation looks like in action by taking a look at the evaluation process for Lead On for Peace and Equality.
Hello, my name is Claudia Plescia, and I'm responsible for organizing the evaluation of Lead On for Peace and Equality. Lead On is a statewide strategy to engage youth by empowering them to be leaders and agents of change in their communities to stop violence. While having evaluation components including post-test, long-term tracking, and other methods, it wasn't until 2012 that the network was able to allocate resources to build the network's capacity to evaluate Lead On. Prior to the beginning of my service term, we had a couple of pieces in place for evaluation. The first was a planning committee which served to guide the evaluation process from start to finish. The other was a conference evaluation which was given to all participants. This brief survey contained process and outcome components. The planning process for Lead On 2012's evaluation began that August. The Lead On Planning Committee reviewed evaluations from the previous year via teleconference in an effort to bring an element of continuous quality improvement. These evaluations were used to inform the content of the event as well as to understand the evaluation process as it was at the time. In October 2012, the prevention staff at ANDVSA, the Lead-On Planning Committee, and other stakeholders were asked to give feedback on what the evaluation process should look like and to decide what information they hoped to get from any evaluation that took place at Lead-On. The following month, the Planning Committee began to make decisions on the methods that would be used in our evaluations. We decided to use two kinds of evaluations, one for the workshops themselves, and the other for the conference as a whole. Both evaluations had process and outcome components and were also designed to be as concise as possible in order to encourage youth to give meaningful feedback without being overwhelmed. Prior to the start of the event, ANDVSA staff members helping out during Lead-On were debriefed on the evaluation process since they were instrumental in the distribution and collection of the surveys. The evaluation process was implemented during Lead-On from November 10th through the 12th. During the event, evaluation also took shape in the form of a digital story. Video footage of the youth's experiences and reactions were collected by youth and staff to bring an element of creativity to the evaluation process. After the event concluded, staff collected the workshop and conference evaluations. Additionally, staff from the network and its member programs were informally asked how they felt the event transpired for the purposes of process evaluation. Starting in December of 2012, I began to enter the data that was collected at the conference, a process which took about a month. Sometimes, it is useful to have a knowledge of statistical software in Microsoft Excel when handling your data, but it doesn't have to be that complex. There are other tools that you can use, such as SurveyMonkey or Wordle, for data analysis. In January 2013, I began to analyze the data I had entered. I looked through the data for patterns, compiled qualitative data into categories, and began creating graphs and other visual representations of the data, which were later shared with ANDVSA member programs and other partner organizations around the state. In February, I began checking in with youth and adult participants to gauge the success of the community planning workshops which took place during Lead-On. In these workshops, youth and adult mentors planned a project aimed at promoting protective factors in their home communities. We deemed the workshop successful if there was evidence to determine that a youth-led project had taken place. In the end, we found that out of the 29 communities that were represented at Lead-On, 24 had carried out youth-led projects in their communities. After data collection and analysis, the findings were compiled into a report which highlights areas of success as well as areas to improve upon for the following year. And from there, the eval process for Lead-On 2013 began.
And that wraps up our final core module of the ANDVSA Statewide Primary Prevention Orientation. Special thanks to Wendy Siebold and Gretchen Clark for the use of their materials and their support of this module. Be sure to check back on andvsa.org for additional modules which will further examine topics related to the primary prevention of domestic violence, sexual assault, and teen dating violence.